Hello. Today I'm going to be going over how Warlock's Fatal Bonds actually works. I'm not going to be going over every aspect of this spell, only really the mechanics of it that are the most interesting to me and that I think aren't as well known. I hope you learned something new with me. A brief description for Fatal Bonds is that you use it on an enemy and it links the targeted enemy and other nearby enemies together. These linked enemies will all take a percentage of the damage that any linked enemy takes. So typically you just try to use it when the enemies are relatively grouped up, so you can get as many linked together as possible, up to 6. But how does this linking actually work? Similar to how Witch Doctor's Paralyzing Cask will bounce from unit to unit, Warlock's Fatal Bonds acts in a somewhat similar way in that it bounces. Although Fatal Bonds bounces are instant, so you can't visually see the bounces like you can with Witch Doctor's Paralyzing Cask. The bounce distance is 700, meaning if I target this Crystal Maiden, it will bounce to another enemy in the 700 radius around the targeted Crystal Maiden. But it won't necessarily affect every hero that's in the 700 radius. Instead, it starts on the targeted unit, then searches in the 700 radius for another unit to bounce to, then searches again in a 700 radius of that new affected unit, and continues this until 6 units are affected, or there are no more targets to link to. The way it prioritizes who it targets works like this. It first looks for the closest enemy unit in the 700 radius that isn't already affected by Fatal Bonds, then if it can't find one, it'll just bounce to the next closest enemy unit. In case that was confusing, I've set up 3 examples to help show what I mean. I've also numbered the Crystal Maidens here to make it easier to explain. In this case, if I target 2, it'll send the Fatal Bonds to 1, because 2 is closer to 1 than it is to 3, and the bounces would stop at 1 because there are no other units to bounce to in the 700 radius of 1. If I were to target 1, it would bounce to 2, then to 3, and finally to 4. This is because with each bounce, Fatal Bonds was looking for the closest unit in its 700 radius that wasn't already affected by Fatal Bonds. If I were to target 2, it would bounce to 1. But then, if I targeted 3, it would bounce to 4. That's because although 3 is closer to 2 than it is to 4, 4 hasn't been affected by Fatal Bonds yet, so that's where the bounce went to. And from there it stops, like in our first example, because there are no other units in 4's 700 radius to bounce to. So I would say, if possible, you probably want to try to use Fatal Bonds on a unit that is somewhere on the edge of a group of units, so it can bounce in a line between them, hopefully hitting as many units as possible. In reality, it's usually good enough to just use Fatal Bonds on any hero in a bunch, but trying to target a hero on the edge of a bunch might make the difference between linking 2 heroes or 6. Despite all of my reading online about how this spell fully works and testing in-game, I actually have noticed some strange inconsistencies that I can't explain. For example, in this case, I'm going to take the same steps to reproduce example 3. The first time it works like it did before, but if I try again, it just doesn't. I can't explain why. It sometimes jumps the way I'd expect it to based on this spell description, and sometimes it doesn't. If anyone knows why this is, I would love to know. I'm not sure if the spell prioritization has something to do with the server ticks or something like that, so sadly I can't explain that, but still most of the time it works as I've explained it. I know the game is still in beta and it's an indie developer, but if Mr. Icefrog could explain himself on this, that would be great. The last thing I'll go over is that the shared damage type is the same as the type of damage inflicted. This means that if you're linked to one of your teammates and they start getting blasted by some physical damage, you can use Ghost Scepter, which will make you take none of that physical damage that your teammate is taking. On the flip side, if they're getting blasted by some magical damage, you can use something like a hood to block that magic damage. Thanks for watching, and I hope you learned something new with me.